The sun was hot above the Marine training base. Soldiers moved around the open firing range, loading their rifles, adjusting their helmets, and waiting for the officer's call. Today was not a normal day. It was a special shooting challenge. 100 small metal targets lined up across the field, each one placed at different distances, hidden behind bushes, rocks, and small hills. Only the best Marine snipers had been invited to try. The goal was simple: hit all 100 targets in one try. No help, no rest, no second chances. It sounded easy. But nobody had ever done it before last year. The highest was 94 out of 100. Even top snipers missed a few. Some missed because of the wind, some because of nerves, but no one had reached the perfect score. The officers were standing under a small shaded tent, holding clipboards, watching everything. The soldiers were serious, focused, and full of tension. Each of them wanted to make history. One by one, they stepped forward, lay flat on the ground, aimed, and fired. Every shot echoed through the air like thunder. Spectators watched from the sides, including families and some visitors from town. Among those visitors was a young woman, maybe 21 or 22 years old. She wore a simple t-shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers. She was not a Marine, not even military. She had come to the base with her older brother, who was one of the snipers. She stood quietly at the back of the crowd, watching each shooter carefully. Her eyes were calm, steady, and sharp, like she understood every shot. The first Marine hit 79 targets, the second hit 84, the third did better, 92, but still missed the last few. Officers looked disappointed, shaking their heads. "We need someone to break the record," one of them whispered. More snipers stepped forward, but none crossed 94. The crowd began to lose energy. People started talking among themselves, some even yawning. That's when the young woman walked forward. Slowly and quietly, she tapped a Marine on the arm and said, "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute?" At first, the Marine laughed. "You serious?" he said, thinking it was a joke. She nodded calmly, her eyes not leaving the range. "I just want to try," she said. Others nearby began to notice. Some smiled, others laughed. "Is she even trained?" "She'll fall over from the recoil." "Hey, she's just a kid." Her brother looked shocked, unsure what she was thinking, but she didn't care. She stepped forward and stood near the shooting line. The officer in charge looked at her, confused. "You're not on the list," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I've been watching, and I'd like one chance, just one." He looked at her for a moment, then at the crowd. Something about her voice, so calm, so steady, made him pause. After a long breath, he nodded. "All right, 1 minute, one rifle. Let's see what you've got." A Marine handed her his rifle, the same model used by everyone. She checked it, adjusted the scope like she had done it 100 times before. People in the crowd got quiet again. The laughter faded, now they were curious. She lay flat on the ground, elbows firm, hands still. The wind blew softly. She closed one eye, took a deep breath, and waited for the signal. "Shooter ready?" the officer called out. She gave a small nod. "Begin." The first shot rang out. Hit. Second shot. Hit. Third. Hit. People leaned in, watching closely. By the time she had fired 10 shots, every single one had hit the target. Not even one miss. The Marines looked at each other. Surprised, her brother stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The officers leaned forward. Their pens paused in midair. She kept firing, her rhythm calm and perfect. She didn't rush, but she didn't waste time either. Her breathing stayed steady, her hands never shook. By the time she reached shot number 50, the crowd was completely silent. Not even the wind dared to interrupt her focus. The girl who had just borrowed a rifle was now showing the Marines what perfect aim looked like. No one spoke, no one moved. Every eye was locked on her, and in that moment, she wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was the center of everything. She had come quietly, stood in the background, and now she was doing the impossible. When the last shot was fired, the air stayed still for a long second. Then, the sound of 100 small metal targets falling echoed across the field like falling dominoes. Everyone looked toward the officer, checking the results. He stared at the screen, blinked, then looked again. 100 out of 100, he said in a quiet voice. Like even he couldn't believe it. Gasps broke out in the crowd. The Marines looked at each other, confused and surprised. Some shook their heads, some looked angry, and some just stood frozen. She stood up slowly, handed the rifle back to the Marine who had given it to her. "Thanks," she said softly. The Marine took it with both hands like he was holding something sacred. That's when the comments started, not from the officers, but from a group of younger Marines standing near the back. That was luck, one said, forcing a laugh. No way she could do it again, said another. A third one raised his voice. She probably had someone helping her. Maybe the scope was preset. She didn't respond. She just stood there calm as before. Her face didn't change, her hands didn't move. She didn't need to defend herself. The targets had spoken for her. But the whispers continued. One Marine stepped forward. Tall and muscular with a heavy voice, he looked at her with a strange mix of amusement and challenge. "You ever shoot in real combat?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I've only hunted." He raised an eyebrow. "Hunted what? Squirrels?" And she looked into his eyes, calm and unshaken. "Coyotes at 500 yards, she said, running ones." Some Marines chuckled, but the officer in charge stepped in quickly. "Enough," he said, voice sharp. "The results are real." He turned to the young woman. "What's your name?" She hesitated, not out of fear, but as if the name didn't really matter. "Emily," she said simply. "Emily Vance." The officer nodded. "Well, Miss Vance, that was remarkable." A silence followed, deep and thick. And then someone in the crowd clapped just once, then another, until the range was filled with quiet applause. Not loud or wild, but respectful, like soldiers giving honor where it was due. But not everyone clapped. The mocking Marines stood stiff, arms crossed, eyes narrow. They didn't like being shown up, especially not by a civilian, especially not by a woman. Later in the locker room, one of them punched a wall and muttered, "She just embarrassed the whole unit." Outside, the officers began asking her more questions. "Where did you learn to shoot like that? Have you been trained somewhere?" She answered gently, "My father taught me. Every morning before school, every evening before dinner, rain or shine," they asked if her father was military. "No," she said, "he was a farmer, but he never missed a shot in his life." Her brother stood close by, still trying to process what had just happened. He had known she could shoot. Of course, he had grown up with her. But even he had never seen her hit 100 out of 100. He whispered to her, "Why didn't you ever try for the army?" She smiled. "Because I don't want to shoot people. Just targets." Suddenly, a camera crew arrived. Local news had heard something incredible happened at the range. They asked for an interview, but Emily shook her head. "No thanks," she said. "This was between me, the wind, and the targets." She stepped away from the cameras and began walking toward the gate. Her brother jogged after her. "You're just gonna leave?" he asked. "I only came to watch," she said. "Didn't plan to stay." Back at the base, the officer called for a meeting with the Marine trainers. "We've been focusing too much on muscle and not enough on mind," he said. "That girl just taught us what calm, control, and discipline really look like." He ordered Emily's name to be added to the base's Hall of Records, and the rifle she used was placed in a glass case with a tag, "Borrowed by Emily Vance, 100 hits in one try." The mocking Marines stayed quiet for the rest of the day, and though some still muttered behind closed doors, they couldn't deny what had happened in front of them. Because once a legend is born, it doesn't matter what you say, it just grows quietly, like a flame that refuses to die. And Emily? She didn't need their approval. She had hit every target. She had already walked away, but she had left something behind, something heavier than medals, louder than applause. She had left proof. News of the girl who hit 100 targets with a borrowed rifle spread through the base like wildfire. By lunchtime, every building, tent, and mess hall was buzzing with her name, Emily Vance. Even soldiers who hadn't been at the range were asking, "Is it true? Did she really hit all 100? No way, was it edited footage?" The officer in charge confirmed it on record. "Everything was real," he said. "One rifle, one try, 100 hits." But there was one thing that stood out most, not just the result, but the way she shot. She didn't look like a soldier, but every bullet hit like it came from a machine built for perfection. It wasn't just aim, it was control, focus, stillness, and something more. Something only a few people noticed but couldn't explain that afternoon. The senior snipers gathered in a private room. They played the video back in slow motion. Every time Emily pulled the trigger, her hand was steady. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the shots. The recoil barely moved her shoulder. Her eye never left the scope, not even for a blink. It was as if she became one with the rifle, One shot, one breath, one heartbeat. And each time, one hit. What's her background again? One of the sergeants asked. No military training, replied another, shaking his head. No medals, no boot camp, no records. Then how? She's something else, interrupted the captain. Some people are born with steel in their blood. We just met one. Meanwhile, Emily sat quietly on a bench near the back gate of the base. She wasn't smiling, wasn't boasting, just drinking from a bottle of water and looking at the clouds. Her brother Mike sat beside her, still in partial disbelief. You know what you did back there? He asked. She nodded slowly. I know, he paused. So why aren't you excited? I didn't come to impress anyone, she replied. I just wanted to feel the weight of a real shot again. Mike leaned back against the wall. Trying to understand her, he remembered their childhood, early mornings before school. When their father made them shoot tin cans from the fence post, their dad didn't believe in loud praise. He only said one thing when you hit the target. Again. No matter how perfect the shot was, he always wanted more calm, more silence. More trust in the bullet. Emily had never stopped practicing. Mike had. Now he understood what made the difference. Back on the range, the Marine who lent Emily his rifle was holding it like it had turned into gold. He stared at the stock, still warm from her grip. Other soldiers walked past him and tapped his shoulder. That rifle made history today, one said. He smiled awkwardly. She made history, not the rifle. Later, when the range cleared out, one of the younger snipers returned alone. He set up 100 targets again. Determined to beat her score, he lay down, adjusted his scope, and started firing. Hit, miss, hit. Miss. He stopped at 83, breathing hard. He stared at the last row of untouched targets. It was like they were staring back, untouched and proud. He packed up and left without a word. That night, a special message came from a retired general. He had seen the video online and made a rare call to the base. Keep an eye on that girl, he said. She doesn't belong in our books. She belongs in our memories. Emily, on the other hand, was already planning to leave in the morning. She didn't want medals or offers or interviews. She had done what she came for. The sound of the bullet, the feel of the trigger, the breath between shots, that was her victory. Not the applause, not the record. Her brother offered to drive her home, but she smiled. I'll take the bus, she said. Gives me time to think. Before she left, an officer gave her a small card with the Marine emblem. If you ever change your mind, he said, we'd be lucky to have you. She nodded, took the card, but left it on the table when she walked away. As the base lights dimmed and the flag lowered for the night, soldiers stood in small groups, still talking about her. Some admired her, some envied her, some didn't understand her, but all of them remembered one thing. Not just the 100 hits, but how each one sounded like it knew exactly where it was meant to go. No doubt, no fear, no noise, just one shot, one hit, and a name they'd never forget. Emily Vance. The next morning, the base was still buzzing. The shooting range was quiet, but the memory of yesterday's perfect shot still echoed in every corner. A name had been whispered across tents, offices, and radio calls. Emily Vance. Not a soldier, not a trainee, not even on the visitor list. Just a civilian girl who had walked into a Marine base and walked out a legend. But no one really knew her. Who was she? Where did she come from? How could she shoot better than trained snipers? In the intelligence room, a curious officer typed her name into the military database. No results. No combat record, no formal weapons training. No academy, just a civilian file, 1 page long. Emily Vance, age 22. No criminal history. Lives in a small rural town. Works part-time at a hardware store, that was it. Nothing special on paper until yesterday changed everything. The officer leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. She doesn't exist in our world, he whispered. But she just outshot it. Meanwhile, far from all the noise, Emily sat quietly on the edge of a wooden bus bench. She wore a gray hoodie, a simple backpack at her feet. No phone in her hand, no earbuds, no distractions, just her eyes looking into the trees. She liked silence. Silence reminded her of early mornings back home, when the world was still waking up. That's when her father taught her how to shoot. He was never a soldier either, just a man who believed that every child should know how to aim, focus, and breathe. He treated shooting like a meditation, not a sport, not violence. Every bullet is a promise, he used to say. You send it with your breath and it never comes back. Emily learned to shoot not for war, But for stillness, she never cared about fame or breaking records. She only cared about one thing, mastery. While the base scrambled to uncover her story, someone had already shared her name online. A short video clip had gone viral. A girl in jeans and sneakers, lying on a Marine range hitting 100 out of 100 targets. The internet exploded. Who is she? Is she Special Forces in disguise? Is this a movie? Theories filled the comment sections. Some said she was a spy. Others said an AI-controlled shooter. But none were true. The truth was simpler and more powerful. She was real, just quiet, just focused. And that made her more dangerous than any soldier trying to prove himself. Back at the base, the Marine whose rifle she had borrowed received a package. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for trusting me with your rifle. Your weapon is sharp and your discipline sharper. May your shots be honest and your heart stay steady." Evie, he read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his locker. For the rest of his life, he would never let anyone touch that rifle again. In a nearby building, a group of snipers held a silent vote. They wanted her name carved into the wall where the range records were kept. Some officers disagreed at first. "She's not a Marine," one said. "But she gave us something to aim for," another replied. "Isn't that what legends do?" The vote passed. Emily Vance, 100 civilian, engraved at the top of the wall in bold letters later that week. Mike returned home from base leave and found his sister repairing an old fence in their backyard. She was hammering nails like nothing had happened. "You made history," he said, tossing his bag down. She looked up and smiled faintly. "I made breakfast too." He laughed. "They're still talking about you. The officers, the soldiers, even the cooks," Emily just shrugged. "It was just shooting. That's all." Mike sat beside her, watching the chickens peck the grass. "You know, Dad would have been proud." "I know," she said softly, but he wouldn't have clapped. He would have said, "Next time use fewer bullets." They both smiled. That was their dad, never impressed by noise, only by peace. Back at the base, a new sign was placed near the range. Breathe, focus, fire, in that order. Inspired by the girl who came and left without asking for anything, Emily never returned to the base. She never replied to interviews, never accepted offers. But she had left behind a change, not in the rules, but in the hearts of the people who saw her shoot. And deep down, every soldier who had witnessed her that day knew the truth. They had seen someone who didn't need a uniform to show greatness. She had nothing to prove, but everything to teach. The world only saw the girl who hit 100 targets in one try, but no one saw where that girl came from. No medals on her wall, no trophies, no fame. Only a small wooden house, half a mile off the last dirt road in a quiet, forgotten town. A house wrapped in old trees and broken fences, where the wind made more noise than the people. And inside that house, her story began. Long before the Marines ever heard her name. Emily Vance was not born with a rifle in her hand. She was born with questions. Why does the wind move like that? Why do birds turn before the sound reaches them? Why do leaves fall straight on some days and sideways on others? Her father never gave her straight answers. He just pointed at the woods and said, "Go find out." Her first lesson wasn't about bullets or barrels. It was about stillness. He took her to the back porch, handed her a wooden stick and said, "Don't move until you can hear the ants." She thought he was joking. He wasn't. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, she started to hear things others couldn't. A twig cracking 3 trees away, the flap of a hawk's wings behind her. The exact second a squirrel decided to run, her ears grew sharper than her eyes, and her body learned how to listen, not just look. She was 9 years old when she held her first real rifle. It wasn't polished or fancy, just a rusty old bolt action her father had repaired himself. It smelled like oil, metal, and dust, like something that carried secrets. Her hands shook the first time, not out of fear but respect. Her father didn't tell her to aim. He told her to breathe. "Don't fight the trigger," he said. "Talk to it." Her first shot missed the can. So did the second, but the third one didn't. It flew through the wind like it belonged there. The can jumped and she smiled. Her father only said one word. Again, that was his way. No praise, no clapping, just repetition, until the skill became part of her skin, like breathing or walking. They shot every morning before school, every evening before supper. Rain, snow, fog, it didn't matter. He taught her that the world doesn't pause for comfort. So neither should she. They built their own targets, old bottles. Empty cans, tin plates, walnuts, apples. They hung them from trees, placed them on fence posts, buried them half in the ground. Each target had a name: silence, patience, focus, wind, and she had to defeat them all over and over again. Not for glory, but for mastery. When Emily turned 13, her father gave her a notebook. It was leather-bound and full of empty pages. "This is your range journal," he said. Not for scores, but for lessons. She filled it with diagrams, weather notes, angles, failures, thoughts, and drawings of wind patterns by 15. She had developed her own breathing pattern by 16. She could hit a bird mid-flight, without stopping her step. But life has a way of changing its own wind one day. Her father didn't come back from the field. She found him leaning against a tree, hand over his chest, eyes to the sky, a quiet end to a quiet man. The rifle lay across his lap like it had known it was time to say goodbye. Emily didn't cry that day. She just sat beside him until the stars came out. Then she picked up the rifle and walked home in the dark. Alone but not lost, he had left her the land, the house, and one final gift, a wooden box under his bed. Inside were maps, photos, small tools, and a stack of hand-cut targets. Each one had a word written on it: breathe, trust, still, and at the very bottom, one last folded note: if you ever get a chance to shoot where others watch, don't aim to impress, aim to remember who you are, and hit the wind like we used to. Dad, she never told anyone about the note, not even her brother. It stayed in her back pocket every time she picked up a rifle. It was with her the day she walked onto that Marine base, the day she borrowed a weapon, lay on the ground, and became the storm in the silence. To the Marines, she was a mystery. To the internet, she was a legend, but in truth, she was just a girl raised by trees, dust, and discipline. A girl whose past wasn't written in medals. But in wood and wind, she didn't shoot to win. She shot to feel whole because her father never aimed to make her famous. He only aimed to make her still enough to hear the truth before the bullet left the barrel. And that's what she carried. Not a weapon, but a memory, and it never missed. The Marine base was never the same after Emily Vance left. People walked differently, trained harder, and aimed slower, not because of rules, but because of respect. She had said almost nothing, but her silence had spoken louder than orders. No medals, no speech, no request for applause. She had only asked, "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute?" And with that one question, she had changed everything. Back at the range, the rifle she used was now locked inside a glass case. It stood tall on a black velvet cloth, with her name carved underneath. Emily Vance, 100 out of 100, civilian shooter. But what really surprised the officers was what came after that day. More than the shot itself, was the shift in how the Marines saw themselves. For weeks, soldiers came to the range with new energy. Not louder, not tougher, just more serious. They cleaned their rifles longer, adjusted their breathing, practiced with eyes closed. They wanted to find what she had shown them: control without tension, power without noise. One young sniper in training, named Dawson, had missed 30 targets during the challenge. He was broken afterward, ready to quit. But when he saw Emily's quiet presence in the recording, something clicked inside him. She wasn't chasing numbers, he whispered to himself. She was chasing calm. From that day, he stopped trying to shoot fast. He started learning how to wait. 6 months later, he scored 98 out of 100 and left a note next to her display case. "Thank you, Miss Vance. You taught me that stillness is stronger than speed." Dawson, the officers noticed a change in behavior all over the base. There were fewer arguments, fewer outbursts, fewer broken tempers. It was as if Emily had left a piece of her silence behind. And it was teaching without words. One morning, Sergeant Grant, who had once mocked her during the challenge, walked into the commander's office and closed the door. He placed a sheet of paper on the desk. It was a letter of apology. "I disrespected someone who never raised her voice," he said quietly, "and she still made me feel smaller than a bullet." The commander didn't say anything. He just nodded and signed the letter, then placed it beside the display case for others to read. Meanwhile, Emily had returned to her normal life, working part-time at the hardware store, feeding her chickens, fixing fences. She never mentioned the Marine base to anyone. Not to customers, not to neighbors, not even to the local newspaper that came asking for an interview. She smiled and said, "Nothing to talk about," and went back to stacking boxes of nails in the back room. But respect has its own way of traveling. One day, a black military car pulled up outside her house. An officer stepped out with a folded American flag and a small wooden plaque. He didn't come to offer her a job. He came to thank her. He handed her the plaque, then saluted her not as a soldier, but as a student bowing to a teacher. Emily looked at the plaque, read the words, and held it for a moment. Then she quietly handed it back. "I appreciate it," she said, "but you can hang it somewhere others will see it." "Not me." He stood still, unsure what to say, then turned and left without another word. Some people earn medals. Some people become the reason medals exist at the base. Her story was now part of the training manual. New recruits watched the video of her shooting, not as entertainment, but as education. They studied her posture, her breathing, her pace. But no one could copy her silence, because it wasn't just quiet. It was earned in one of the training classrooms. A quote was painted on the wall in large black letters. "True power doesn't need to shout. It only needs to listen before it strikes." Even the instructors had changed. They were tougher, yes, but they now taught humility along with skill. Because of Emily, they understood something new. That a civilian with no title could still carry the spirit of a warrior, and that respect is not given by rank, but by presence. Months passed, and her name became a quiet symbol. When a soldier showed patience during pressure, someone would say, "You're pulling a Vance today," and that meant something. It meant control, it meant class, it meant quiet courage. Emily never knew about these changes. She wasn't looking for legacy. She only wanted to live her life without noise. But what she left behind was louder than bullets. She had earned the respect of warriors, not with orders, but with one rifle, 1 minute, and a lifetime of stillness. Emily Vance never told anyone about what she did on the Marine base, not her neighbors, not her co-workers at the hardware store, not even her childhood best friend. To her, it was just a quiet moment, a chance to feel the weight of a real rifle again. She had done what she came to do, nothing more, nothing less. But outside her small town, the world had other plans. Because the story didn't stay buried, it spread. First in whispers, then in headlines. A short video clip had made it onto social media. It showed a girl in jeans lying calmly on the ground, firing one shot after another. Target after target fell. The Marine next to her stood frozen, his mouth open. Someone off camera whispered, "She hit every single one." And the video ended with her standing up, brushing the dust off her knees and walking away. No speech, no smile, just silence. Within hours, the video had thousands of views. By the next day, millions. People didn't just watch. They felt something. There was something about her stillness, her focus, her humility. She didn't look like a soldier or a hero. She looked like a girl from the farm, calm and steady, yet deadly accurate. And the world leaned in to ask one question: who is she? News outlets started calling the Marine base. Who is the civilian girl who broke the sniper record? Is she a secret military prodigy? Was it staged? But the officers gave a simple answer. She asked to borrow a rifle. We said yes. She hit 100 out of 100. Journalists tracked her name. Emily Vance. They found her town, her job, her quiet house. Some even drove out to see her, but she turned them all away. "I'm not looking for attention," she said politely. "Just peace." A famous TV anchor called her story "The Shot Heard Without a Sound." A documentary team started working on a film titled "The Girl Who Humbled the Marines." Podcasters, bloggers, even retired generals began talking about her. "She didn't challenge us," said one sniper on a podcast. "She reminded us what real discipline looks like." But while the world was turning her into a symbol, Emily stayed the same. She still woke up early to feed the chickens, still helped her neighbors fix broken fences, still went to the hardware store with a quiet smile and old jeans covered in dust. She didn't read the articles or listen to the interviews. She just kept moving, like the wind that trained her. One afternoon, a large envelope arrived at her door. Inside was a letter and an invitation. The president himself had written it. "Dear Miss Vance, your actions at the Marine base have inspired a nation. We would be honored to present you with a National Civilian Medal of Excellence. Please consider attending a ceremony in Washington, D.C." With deep respect, Emily read the letter twice. folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer beside her father's note. She didn't throw it away, but she didn't answer it either, because for her, the reward was already given. In silence, in focus, in doing something the right way, not the loud way. But even without her voice, her story moved. A famous artist painted her portrait. In it, she was not shown shooting or holding a rifle. She was simply sitting under a tree with her hands folded and eyes closed. The title? Aim Without Anger. A school in North Dakota renamed their shooting range the Vance Field to inspire focus over fire. A girls' youth camp invited her to speak. She didn't go, but she sent a handwritten message. You don't need loudness to be strong. You don't need anger to be powerful. You only need one breath, one choice, one moment, and then let your actions speak. Evie, her message was read aloud at the campfire, and many young girls began training. Not to fight, but to find control. Emily had unintentionally become a teacher, a role model, a quiet revolution, all without stepping into the spotlight, all without saying more than she needed to. At the Marine base, her name became part of tradition. New recruits were told her story on their first day. Respect the rifle, their sergeant would say. Because once, a civilian came here and showed us what respect really means. And every time a young soldier picked up a rifle and took a deep breath before shooting, they were following Emily's lesson. That discipline is louder than noise, that humility travels farther than bullets, and that real power doesn't need to be seen, only felt. Years passed, but the name Emily Vance never faded. Not from memory, not from training manuals, and not from the quiet corners of the world where silence still held power. She had never worn a uniform, never held a rank, and never accepted any medal. But in the hearts of many, she had become something greater than a soldier. She had become a legend. At the Marine base where it all began, a new generation of recruits now walked the same range. They didn't laugh, they didn't boast. Before their first shot, they all paused at the display case holding the rifle she once used. Below it, her name still rested on polished brass. Emily Vance, 100-100, civilian. Some touched the glass for luck. Others whispered short prayers for focus. And some just stood there, hoping to feel what she had left behind. A strange calm like the wind before sunrise. She had never returned, never stepped foot on the base again. But her presence remained stronger than any living voice. Instructors taught her breathing technique as part of sniper prep. They called it the Vance method. Breathe in when the world is loud, hold when it goes still, exhale only when your soul is silent, then fire. On the anniversary of her legendary shot, the Marines held a small private moment of silence each year. No ceremony, no big speeches, just the sound of flags moving gently in the wind. It wasn't about worship, it was about honor. Because Emily hadn't come to prove herself, she had come to be herself. And that made her unforgettable elsewhere in the country. Her story had changed lives. At a rural girls' school in Montana, a young girl named Tara, shy and nervous, stood at her first shooting competition. Her hands shook, her mind raced. But before her turn, her coach handed her a folded piece of paper. It had a quote, "You don't have to be loud to be strong, you just have to be steady." Tara won that competition. She later became a national markswoman. When reporters asked who inspired her, she only said, "A girl who walked away from applause." Meanwhile, Emily remained in her quiet town, still helping neighbors fix broken tractors, still feeding chickens, still waking early to feel the morning fog on her face. To her, the fame was like a passing train, noisy and gone in a flash. She had no use for it. Sometimes kids from nearby towns would come to her fence with notebooks and cameras. "Miss Vance, can you teach us to shoot?" She'd smile and ask, "Why do you want to shoot?" If they said to be the best or to go viral, she'd send them home. But if they said to learn, she'd invite them in and teach them the first thing her father ever taught her. Stillness. She never charged money, never asked for attention. She only taught them how to listen to the earth before pulling the trigger. Her porch became a small school with no walls, a place where lessons were quiet but deep, and every student left changed, not just as shooters, but as humans. One winter evening, her brother Mike visited with his own kids. They sat around the fire as snow fell outside. "Do you ever regret not joining the army?" he asked softly. Emily stared into the flames for a long moment, then said, "No. If I had worn the uniform, they would have only seen the badge, not the lesson." Mike nodded. He understood now. She didn't need a battlefield to make a difference. She had changed people from the inside without needing to fire another shot. And so, her legend grew. Not because she chased it, but because she ran in the opposite direction, while others marched loudly. She walked quietly and still arrived further than anyone else, even today. Her name lives on in whispers, not headlines. In shooting ranges, in classrooms, in quiet forests, and in every heart that believes true power isn't loud. It's calm, focused and unshakable. She had borrowed a rifle, not for war but for memory, not to impress, but to remind herself that silence still has aim. And when she fired that last perfect shot, she didn't just hit a target. She hit history. Then she stood up, brushed off the dust, and walked away, a legend but never a soldier.